Yep, I just got my hands on the new Canon R1. B&H delivered this to me a couple days ago, and I've just been getting used to it, configuring it, and beginning what's ultimately going to be my 10,000 image journey before I write a review. But one of the things that first stood out to me, something I was worried about from the very, very early kind of leaked reports about this camera, was that it's quite large and heavy, probably 5% bigger than the Canon R3, which I've been using basically since it was released however many years ago. But before I continue with the point of this video, I do want to take a moment to thank all of my patrons for their support. I am not sponsored by Canon or any of the other camera brands that I write reviews about. All of my opinions are issued from as unbiased a place that I can be, and the support of my patrons goes such a long way toward enabling that to happen. So I just want to take a second to thank you all. Okay, so when I first picked up the R1, my fears were somewhat realized. Again, I really don't want to issue this as the final word until I've shot at least 10,000 images with this camera, but it is as big and heavy as it looks. With the Canon R3, it's actually way lighter. I can't tell you how many times I put my Canon R3 in the hands of somebody I'm shooting with and said, look how light this is, isn't that surprising? And they always are. It looks lighter and feels more compact than most people imagine it's going to. And once they actually put their hands on it, it's like a pleasant experience. And again, with the R1, it basically feels and operates as heavy as it looks, which, I don't know, the jury's out. It did spark a memory of something I've been wanting to talk about for a while. And I've hinted at this in other posts, especially when it comes to using on-camera flash for bounce, and how you really want to be particular about like where the center of gravity lies on a camera and just the overall weight of things that you're shooting with, so you don't develop pain in your wrist. And one of the things I've grown to appreciate about Canon's lenses, especially the silver ring lenses, is the fact that they all perform fairly respectably. Definitely given their price point. Like, they perform very, very well for their price point, but given the size of this 51.8 or the 16 2.8 or the 24 1.8 or the 35 1.8, all of these are what I like to call featherweight lenses. I mean, they literally weigh nothing, maybe like as much as a pencil. I don't know. I mean, they weigh so little. And knowing that, I structure what lenses I use throughout a wedding day very intentionally. So I almost always start with like getting ready photos in the first few hours of the day with the silver ring lenses, very lightweight. To somebody being photographed when they're just getting used to me, it's not like a giant, huge, black hole that they're looking into. It's a tiny little lens on, maybe a bigger camera, but especially if you don't shoot with a gripped rig, then it's also a tiny camera. So typically up until the time of about first look or any portraits with the couple, that is when I will switch over to the red ring, larger 1.2, 1.4 element lenses. And that just gives those images a little bit more punch with shooting a 1.2 just looks stunningly beautiful compared to a 1.8, but it's not that obvious. I can't honestly say that when I'm, disconnected from, the wedding by a couple weeks and I'm in the editing process, it doesn't immediately jump out to me when I exactly made that switch. It's kind of amazing. But I will shoot through portraits, ceremony, and usually family photos with all the heavier lenses. And then I'll switch back to the silver ring lightweight lenses for cocktail hour. I'll probably switch back to the heavier lenses for speeches or any toasts, and maybe some of the first dancing. But once it's open dancing, I'm back to the silver ring lenses. Now, there is a little bit of a trade-off with that, and that's, if you're not comfortable with autofocus, which mirrorless cameras are absolutely stellar at these days, but they are a lot more dependent on having light coming through the glass in order for it to acquire focus without using, a focus assist beam. So you do lose a little bit of an autofocus advantage if you shoot with a 1.8 series lens, because literally not as much light is going to be coming through the lens that allows the camera to open up the aperture and acquire focus in low light as easily as with a 1.2 or a 1.4 lens. Now, there are just a few other trade-offs to consider with the silver ring lenses. I showed and talked about a second ago, the 16 millimeter. The distortion on this is laughably terrible. You absolutely have to apply distortion correction in post, which I really hate doing. It's just an extra step and a little bit of extra overhead that I don't want to have to deal with. I would say the 24 1.8, has noticeable distortion, but you can kind of get away with it unless you're shooting something that has what the viewer would know needs to be like really straight lines, like a brick wall or something like that. The 50 1.8, I actually own 2 of them because they're so good. Oh, and I forgot to mention, another reason I shoot earlier in the day with like getting ready photos with the silver ring lenses is because they're 1.8, the focusing distance is much closer than the 50 1.2. And so for detail shots of the rings or paper goods or whatever, the 50 1.8 really works great. So anyway, the 50, I would say almost no distortion that I would ever feel I need to correct for. And same with the 35 1.8. The 35 1.8 also has the advantage of built-in lens stabilization. So you can combine the lens capable stabilization with the built-in IBIS of the sensor stabilization and get really, really smooth shots, if you're a little unsteady with your hands. So that's it. That's the entire purpose of this video, is to highlight my strategy and how I rotate between the silver ring lenses and the red ring lenses throughout a wedding day so that I'm always very comfortable and I'm never getting any pain or just tired hands and wrists from shooting with all these heavier lenses. And if you're a photographer that uses something like the 28-70 throughout the day, I highly recommend thinking about this as a strategy. And if nothing else, this is an incredibly affordable lineup to have as a backup. Like you should be having some overlap in your focal lengths as a backup option in case anything happens to your really expensive primary lenses. Yeah, I'm super excited to review the R1. I have a wedding tomorrow, and if you have any questions at all about this or the R1 or anything else, always feel free to ask in the comments. As always, thank you so much for your attention, and I'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.